Before we get back to the blood flow through the heart and body, I wanted to take a couple minutes to talk about different types of blood vessels. If I were able to ask you, you probably would be able to come up with the three different types of blood vessels. They're arteries, veins, and capillaries. But you may not necessarily know what the difference is between them, because oftentimes I'll have students say, well, there are arteries and then there are blood vessels. Well, an artery is a type of blood vessel. So arteries, if pushed, people will give a definition of arteries as blood vessels that carry blood that's high in oxygen. And whereas that's true 95% of the time, there are some exceptions to that, so we can't use that as a definition. A better definition is that arteries carry blood away from the heart. So arteries away, that's how I remember it. Veins, then, are blood vessels that carry blood back to the heart. Most of the time, the blood is low in oxygen. It is deoxygenated, but not all the time. So we have to use this definition instead of that, carrying low oxygenated blood. Then the third type of blood vessels are capillaries. And capillaries, there are three things that I want you to know about them. One is that they are the smallest blood vessels in the body. In fact, they're so small that only one red blood cell at a time can go through them. They have to go through single file. And you'll have a chance to see some videos later that show that. Another thing about capillaries is that they are the turnaround point for blood flow. If arteries carry blood away from the heart and veins carry blood back to the heart, there has to be a place where the directionality of the blood flow changes, and it's at the capillaries. And then the third thing about capillaries that we're going to talk about here a little bit more is the fact that capillaries are the only place where gas exchange can take place. And that's because capillaries have gaps in their structure that allows for gases to go back and forth. So let's take a closer look at this. What we're doing in our blood flow through the heart and body, where we left off in video 1 was at the pulmonary artery. So an artery is a blood vessel that carries blood away from the heart. So in this case, we can say that the pulmonary artery is carrying blood away from the heart towards the lung. That's what pulmonary means. Pulmonary means lung. But we know that the blood is deoxygenated because we haven't said anything about that changing, and we started with deoxygenated blood empties into the right atrium. Down here, we see that there's a pulmonary vein, so we know then a vein is a blood vessel that carries blood back towards the heart, so we know that at some point anyway, there's going to be blood going back to the heart through that pulmonary vein. And that means that this section in the middle, remember, capillaries are the place where blood flow changes direction. Wait. There we go. So that's where the capillaries are going to be located. And capillaries are not the same size as arteries and veins. I just put it together this way to make it easier to show. So as blood is going through the pulmonary artery from the heart toward the lungs, these pulmonary arteries have a low level of oxygen because they're deoxygenated, and they have high levels of CO2. Well, when you take a breath into your lung, the reason why you breathe is to bring in air that has more oxygen in it. So there's high levels of oxygen, low levels of CO2. Oxygen and carbon dioxide levels in the blood are always going to be opposites of each other. They are inversely proportional. But what I really like for you to notice is this. Well, look, there's high oxygen here and low oxygen here. And with the carbon dioxide, there's high carbon dioxide here and low carbon dioxide here. And hopefully that rings a bell with you from freshman bio. High concentration one place, low concentration of something the other place. Substances move from high concentration to low concentration. What could that be? Could it perhaps be diffusion? Why, yes, as a matter of fact, it could. So you've got high levels of carbon dioxide in the blood vessel, in the artery, low levels of carbon dioxide in the lungs. So carbon dioxide is going to diffuse from the capillaries from the blood to the lungs, and then that carbon dioxide, it's a waste product, it's going to get exhaled where you breathe it out. The same thing is going to happen with the oxygen, only in the opposite direction, because there's high oxygen levels in the lungs and low oxygen levels in the blood. Oxygen is going to diffuse from the lungs to the blood, so that now, as blood leaves the lungs, you've got high levels of oxygen and low levels of carbon dioxide. And those blood vessels are going to carry this oxygenated blood. It's a vein, so it's going to carry it back to the heart. All right, so let me switch here so that you can get this filled in. So this is just the words to explain what that diagram just did. So at the lungs, blood is high in carbon dioxide and low in oxygen. We said that. Air in the lungs is high in oxygen and low in carbon dioxide. That's where the diffusion is getting set up. So carbon dioxide moves from the blood to the lungs by diffusion and is then exhaled. While oxygen then moves from the lungs to the blood by diffusion, and the blood is now oxygenated. And that's good because that's what we want. At this point in time, well, if you need to, pause the video so you can get all those lines filled in, back it up if you need to. And now you've got both the visual diagram and the words explaining how this happens. So we know from the diagram that the blood is traveling back to the heart through the pulmonary veins, and that blood is going to empty into the left atrium. Let me go to our picture so that we can see this in action. So here we have a pulmonary vein, because pulmonary veins are right here, letter H. There are actually 4 pulmonary veins, 2 from the left side, 2 from the right side. So 2 from the left lungs, 2 from the right lungs. So those are the pulmonary veins, and they, all 4 of them, empty into the left atrium. And I would like to point out that there are these 4 little ovals in the left atrium. There's one, there's one, there's one, and there's one. Those are just showing that the pulmonary veins are emptying into the left atrium. All right, so go ahead and pause and get those colored, and I'll meet you back at the PowerPoint. All right, so from the left atrium, blood has to go to the left ventricle, but anytime that blood goes through it goes from one chamber to another location. Anytime that blood leaves a chamber of the heart, it has to go through a valve. And in this case, it goes through the bicuspid valve into the left ventricle. Bicuspid, bi means 2. If you remember on the right side of the heart, it's the tricuspid valve. So the tricuspid valve has 3 flaps to it. The bicuspid valve only has 2, and it goes into the left ventricle. So we'll use this color for the bicuspid valve. Remember I told you that AV just means atrioventricular? Back in the day, this valve was called the mitral valve. I don't really care about that. So the bicuspid valve, here's one flap of the bicuspid valve, and here's the other flap of the bicuspid valve. 2 flaps. Also keep in mind that from the left side, we're going to include this tendon that holds the valve flaps in place. We're going to include that as part of the valve. So color that the same color that you're using for the valve. Try to use different colors. And then the left ventricle is all of this. Make sure you color all of it. Try not to go over the tendons. And you're going to include these things that are labeled F1. Those are the papillary muscles. So you're going to color those the same color as the left ventricle. Now, if you notice here, look at, I'll mention this in the next video too, but look at how thick the muscle is on the right ventricle. Look at how thick the muscle is on the left ventricle. Very significant difference in thickness, and I'll address that in the next video. So here you go. This will get us to our next stage in the process. Let me know if you have any questions.